Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out People of Reddit. Story 1. The tables have turned. Years ago, there was this guy I sometimes used to hang out with. I really liked him and would do anything for him. Unfortunately, the efforts weren't reciprocated. It was difficult to get a hold of him as he would leave me on read and wouldn't answer my calls. Then after a few days he would reply back that he was very busy and tired because of work and proceeded to start a conversation with me, as when I replied he would just leave me on read again. It was truly infuriating, but what could I do? I really liked him and was acting like a fool. The last drop was when one day he invited me to go to the movies. I got ready and waited for him to pick me up at the appointed time. The time came and he wasn't showing up. I waited and waited. I called him and he didn't answer, I texted him and he didn't see my message. A couple hours later, he sends me a message apologizing that he was so tired and didn't feel like going out. At this point, I was so done with him. I told him he could at least tell me he wasn't willing to go out and I wouldn't be waiting for him like a clown. Nowadays, the same guy chases me relentlessly. I am no longer interested in him. He keeps double texting me saying how much he regrets for not giving me the value and love I deserved back then, that he realized I am a wonderful woman who did so much for him and that he would be willing to do anything for me, that he will always be there whenever I need something. I leave him on read. He keeps calling me and I don't answer his calls. This feels good because now I hope he understands how I felt back then when I used to be ignored by him too. Story 2. Locker Shenanigans. TLDR at the end. It's basically a play stupid games win stupid prizes story. Trigger warning, bratty teenagers. This dumb story is about me at the age of 14 and my two similarly aged friends at the time, A and B. We all grew up together and became closer as a group in the first year of secondary school, the only such school in town. Said school was large, hosting well over 2,000 students in years 8 through 12. The school's target capacity was half that, however, and there was a small army of portable classrooms stationed out in the parking lot. The hallways were crowded during breaks and the cafeteria was always packed. Banks of half-size lockers with built-in latching combination locks lined every hallway, and locker assignment was random. Breaks between classes were 8 minutes long, and when the second bell rang you had to be in your seat. Given the school layout and density of student body, it was practical to have the whole morning's textbooks and notebooks in your bag in order to arrive on time to each class. These were the days before computers were ubiquitous, and all those books were hiaavi. Early in our second year at this school, the three of us discovered that our locker assignments were far-flung, and we quickly decided to share our lockers and take the literal weight off of our shoulders. We would put our personal effects in the top shelf of our assigned lockers, books in the bottom of whichever locker was closest to the associated classroom. This arrangement worked for a surprisingly long time without issue. As the year went on, things began to change. A and B were in a silly phase, I was growing tired of it and getting prickly, and I think we all felt the schism. Respect for personal effects in my locker was decreasing. My snacks were disappearing. Candy wrappers and crumbs were left behind. I had put a 6-pack of 7UP on my shelf, drank one, and returned to find one left. Turns out A had grabbed one, given some to friends who happened to be there, never bothered to inform me let alone ask, and was unapologetic when confronted. These also were not replaced upon request, which really got under my skin. I asked A and B to leave my food alone, or ask first, at least, and not leave messes in the locker, and they giggled, but they agreed. One afternoon shortly thereafter, I opened my locker to find unwrapped candy littered about and 7UP sprinkled everywhere, as though someone had sloppily opened a can facing into the locker. And the wrappers, of course. Completing the scene was a lumpy little objet d'art made of candies and a wrapper, half welded to each other in the locker floor with 7UP. Those particular candies were the chalky ones that come in rolls, and they were paradoxically both stuck like glue and damp. Ew. I wondered if that pile included saliva, to be honest. If you, Dear reader, have calculated that my last 7 UP was gone, you have done the math correctly. Well then. In that moment I knew I'd had enough, but what I didn't have in that moment was time. I grabbed my books, slammed the locker door shut with unnecessary force, shut it again with less force and more embarrassment when it popped open in protest, and stomped off to my next class. I was seething, and the teenage hormones were flowing. Handling the sticky book spines, no chance to clean them, ugh, added more fuel to the raging fire of self-righteous desire to be done with this bullpucky once and for all. As it so happened, I had very few classes with A and B. There were several classes for core courses each semester, respective elective courses were in different departments. As I sat and seated, I recalled that I rarely saw them between classes, and on this day the following class would be the last class of the day for most students including A and B, but not for those in my elective class. In addition, there was a longer break between the end of the last class and the start of the elective class, about 20 minutes. An idea took shape. At the next break, I went straight to the office to inquire about a lock change request since the locks were built in. I was told that requests would be serviced in the off hours that day, but not before most students were expected to be gone for the day. I happily submitted my request, a very short process, thankfully, and scurried off to the following class. At the end of the day, before my elective class, I went first to A and B's lockers to fetch my books from both, managing not to run into either A or B on the way, then to a bathroom sink for a soapy wet paper towel. By the time I got to my locker the halls had mostly cleared out. I quickly tidied my locker, put away my books and fetched the books I would need for next morning's classes. I then grabbed all their books and put them in their respective lockers. By then A and B had left, their jackets were gone. I didn't do anything other than put their books away neatly. Lost opportunity, maybe, but I wanted to keep my nose clean if they kicked up a fuss. I arrived at my elective class barely on time. Next morning I went straight to class, since I didn't have the new combo. I was called to the office over morning announcements to come pick up a memo, a very common generic announcement. The memo was the new lock combo. The locks all looked identical, so I can only imagine the confusion and slowly dawning comprehension when the old combo didn't work. There was no easy way to find me and figure it out, and the crowded halls made it easy for me to avoid them. It most likely took some time for them to realize their books were in their own lockers. I did see them from afar in the halls later that day, and their sour looks and change of direction told me that they'd figured it out. Epilogue. There was no way to avoid it coming to a head as we all played sport together, with A and I on the same team coached by A's parent and B on another team in the same league. A was very unimpressed but also had no rejoinder. We got on well enough in sport but remained at a distance friendship-wise. The next year I left sport to focus on my elective, and we went our separate ways for many years until the Book of Faces became a thing. A and I reconnected. B has largely remained off socials but we've briefly connected at reunions. A and B, if you recognize yourselves, my God, weren't we stupid? I'd like to think I've learned some things since then. Like how to chill out. LOL. TLDR, friends mess up my locker, I cut off access and friendship without warning. Story 3. A slow satisfaction. This goes back over 15 years. I worked as a credit manager for a well-known UK directory inquiries company, think about Running Men. The company was a walking disaster, high staff turnover, poor sales practices and burning through cash constantly, all the usual crap. The sales team used to forge signatures, commission was paid up front and they often left before being discovered. Anyway, I ran a collections and administration team, we kept the cash coming in. For those that don't know, on top of the money made from dialing the premium number directory inquiries, companies also sold the top few slots in each category to businesses. For example, locksmiths were very popular, so a locksmith in London would pay 200k a year for one of the paid slots. If you got locked out of your car/house you often only had your phone, so would want a locksmith, so if you needed a locksmith, Calling directory inquiries meant you would be given one of the paid slots 7 out of 10 times. Another popular and expensive slot was massage parlors, horny drunk men falling out of pubs with only their phone. Anyway, think of a category and they sold it and for a lot of money. Turnover for the slots was over 60M per year. However, we were owned by a US company who didn't really understand the UK and often made crazy decisions and often last minute. Example being a New York trip I had planned and booked months in advance had to be cancelled because the global CFO decided the day before I flew he needed to fly to the UK and I was required in the meeting. Luckily they offered to pay for everything so I didn't lose out. I actually managed to cancel and get a refund on some things, so actually ended up, the meeting lasted 80 minutes and my input less than 10 minutes. Anyway, enough background. The company, in the face of the looming shadow of mobile internet, decided to make redundancies. I was selected as possible candidate. No biggie, that's life, so I started hunting around just in case. 1 month later I find out that I'm actually getting made redundant, but they offer a pretty generous redundancy payment so I can stay on until a certain date so they can smooth transition to the CFO. Independently, I also find a great new credit management job with more money for a much more stable company. My mistake was mentioning this. I should mention at this point that the first round of redundancies meant my financial controller leaves and I'm managed directly by the CFO. He is supposed to be spending time with me to understand some of the necessary tasks I do, which includes amongst others the creation and processing of the direct debit schedule every month. This is how our slot customers pay and it's a lot of money. Obviously he doesn't make any time despite the fact reminded him multiple times right up my last day. He never makes time. However, he had heard about my new role and the day before my last day I'm pulled into a HR meeting to be told they've decided I'm too important to let go and I'm really needed. My redundancy is cancelled when they know full well I've committed to a new role and they get to not pay my redundancy payment. I take it on the chin and I say my goodbyes and move on to my new role. 2 weeks later I'm in a board meeting in my new role, sitting with my new CEO/MD, CFO/FD when one of the secretaries comes in and pulls me out. It's my former CFO who's called the main number of my new company and put through an urgent request to speak to me. I'm dumbfounded. He explains that the direct debit schedule has failed and he doesn't know why. Over 5M of direct debits haven't come in and he's panicking. He asks me whether I can help and fix it, now? Leave my new company, come back as a favor for 1 day and sort it out? I calmly and carefully explain I no longer work for him or the company and I'm too busy with my new role. I go on to say that I would have had more time for outside activities had my redundancy payment been honored. It was one of the greatest moments of my life and I look back with pride. I was calm and collected, I never lost my temper. The CFO was dismissed a few weeks later and whilst I'm sure the issue was only a small blip, the company was essentially done and dusted a year or so later. They pivoted to loans and other things without success and I moved on. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.